Hello and welcome to Path to Power. I'm Matt Cooper.
And I'm Ivan Yates.
We've a bit of news for you to start with. If you want more of us, yes, indeed, you could have more of us. There's a number of ways to do so. We are launching a second episode per week for subscribers only. Yes, so you can still continue to get your weekly fix of Path to Power if that's what you want for free with the ads, albeit it'll be a day later coming now. But if you subscribe to pathtopowerpodcast.com, you will get that initial weekly podcast on the usual day, and you'll also get a bonus one the following Monday or Tuesday, which we take into account what's happened over the weekend, and we deal with your questions that they send to us. So a subscription model for a second bonus episode. Pathtopowerpodcast.com is the website to which you can go for all of your information in relation to how you become a subscriber. Looking forward to the extra work, Ivan?
Indeed. How much will it cost?
€6 a month is all it costs. An absolute bargain. And that's about the price of a pint in Dublin, isn't it, Ivan? You know the price of a pint better than I would.
You get it maybe a little bit more down the country.
Okay, so that's one thing. Something else I want to tell you about. Path to Power Live, the live podcast. Next week, we're almost there. And we've sold the vast bulk of the tickets for the Olympia Theatre in Dublin for next Wednesday, September 11th. But there are still some available if you want to go to ticketmaster.ie. No dynamic pricing applying to these particular tickets. They're there at a set price. And if you want to see us in Cork, there are definitely some tickets available for the Opera House on Friday, September 13th. So this is my last chance on this podcast to let you know that we will be going live to both of those venues. We will have special guests as well who will be interviewing at each of those venues, and we will have so much to talk about, particularly in the Olympia on Wednesday night, because that'll be within hours of the Trump-Harris debate in the United States. So we'll be looking at that as well as dealing with lots of issues relevant to a Dublin audience, and then a different show in Cork, very much relevant to a Cork audience. And you've been swatting up, I believe, Ivan, on all of what's going on in the constituencies in Dublin and also in Cork City and County.
Yes, it couldn't be more timely. Both for Dublin and for Munster, insofar as nearly all the selection conventions and additions. So the slate of runners in each of the 6 Cork constituencies is becoming apparent. Who are the independents and the smaller parties running? And I think we should be in a position to certainly say who's in the running and perhaps call it for some of those. And I guarantee you there'll be some new faces you haven't heard tell of who will be TDs before Christmas.
Okay, so that is what we're planning for the live events, but let's get to today's edition of Path to Power. And let's start with tickets and ticket pricing, because, Ivan, I'm sure you were most disappointed. Did you get your Oasis tickets?
Well, I get for free. I go in the box. I don't have to pay if I want to go. So I have people who can organise that for me in the corporate hospitality boxes. And they do very nice lamb and beef, and the red wine is up to my standard. So it's not a problem. It is a first world problem. I noticed the controversy. What really interested me was because I remember in 2021, Noel Rock had introduced a private members bill to ban ticket touts. And to be honest with you, at matches, because I'm a lastminute.com, I actually like touts, and the fact that, there are no longer sort of paper tickets for matches.
There actually are times when you'll actually pay to go to something.
Oh, absolutely. And that would be sport related. But the point about it is, and I don't mind paying a bit more, but, there is supply and demand here. This happens to hotel rooms, it happens to airline seats, and so on. But the politics of this is interesting, because I see a number of Fianna Fáilers, Niamh Smith, Timmy Dooley especially, jumping up and down saying they'll introduce a ban. The only question I think it needs to be answered from a consumer perspective, because it is a market at the end of the day, is how many tickets did they sell at the list price? Because we don't seem to have that information.
Well, see, this was, I think, the advertising was misleading to start with. I think this is the problem, in that when initially it was said tickets starting at €86, we weren't told how many tickets were going to be available at €86.50. And then many of the people who went looking for those tickets found those tickets were costing €415 because dynamic pricing was applied. Now, there's never going to be enough tickets to actually make everyone happy for this. It was clear, I think, from the outset that given the reaction to the announcement that Oasis were reforming, that 2 nights would not be enough. My suspicion is, and maybe by the time this podcast is listened to by people, there may have been an announcement for an extra 2 nights. I suspect a bit like what happened with Coldplay last weekend. The 2 nights that we have, I think it's the 16th and 17th, I stand to be corrected on that.
Of what month?
Of August next year. Then you have a gap of a day, and then you have 2 more dates following that, like the way
So I'm taking the All-Ireland won't be in September.
The All-Ireland will definitely be staying in July.
They can't get the GA out of Croke Park quick enough.
So, but what struck me, so the problem there is going to be that if they do announce the extra dates, then what pricing is going to apply to that? Is it going to be dynamic pricing? Is it going to be set pricing that people can trust? In which case, those who paid under the dynamic pricing model for the first 2 gigs are going to be furious.
Can I ask you a question? Because I hear what a lot of people do is, say 2 people want to go. They buy 4 tickets and they resell the other 2. In other words, to get free tickets, essentially. Is there any limit when they did your dynamic prices? Could I buy, say I'm first in the queue, could I buy 10 or was it limited? Because that's surely a fairer way of doing it.
I don't know because I wasn't looking to buy tickets for Oasis. I think, though, there was probably a limit on 4 per purchase, whatever. Although, again, people get worked up about you get charged a handling fee per ticket rather than per transaction, which doesn't seem fair either. But there is a way the government can deal with this. I mean, I heard Taoiseach Micheál Martin out at the weekend asking Ticketmaster to reflect on what they had done. I was going, for God's sake, reflect. I'd say they're reflecting. Geez, we should be doing this all the time. We make even more money out of this. And of course, there actually, it looked like Taylor Swift and Coldplay. There was a similar degree of dynamic pricing went on that perhaps people didn't actually realise. I know they may have started for the system, but it certainly applied for the resale of tickets. And that little scam that you just explained to me, which is one that I wasn't aware of people deliberately overbooking tickets and the hope of being able to sell the extra 2 tickets to cover the price of their own tickets, which is an interesting angle on it. There is, as been pointed out, as Gavin Riley pointed out in a tweet during the week, the Virgin Media News political correspondent, that it is very possible just by a simple ministerial order to make it under the Consumer Act when it comes to misleading advertising and whatever. It could be very easy to actually make the ticket promoters say exactly how many tickets at each individual price are available, which would get around the whole dynamic pricing issue. But I suppose, you know what you should be worried about as well, what we all should be worried about is that others now will look at ticket prices for other events, sports events. Can you imagine if you applied dynamic pricing to rugby internationals, for example? Say, for example, the Ireland-New Zealand game, which is on in November. I mean, can you imagine what prices could be achieved by the I.R.F.U. if they actually...
But Dáil and eBay, you can see them for, the days before the All-Ireland, hurling or football final, they will go for a multiple of 5 of what they'd be face value.
Yeah, but that isn't necessarily the GAA or the I.R.F.U.
No, it's individuals.
Yes, so this would be a way that maybe the organisations would think, well, we'll get all the money that if we price tickets, say, at €130 for Ireland against New Zealand, well, if dynamic pricing suggests that we might be able to sell a good chunk of them at €200 or €250, I don't think sporting organisations could go that way, though, could they?
Well, I don't know, but I put it like this. My first reaction was, Jesus, politicians, there's no limit to the nanny state. But on reflection, it does seem a rip-off and worthy, not so much of political intervention, but where are the consumer watchdogs?
Well, you see, also you'd say there, nanny state and political intervention, but surely that is what politics should be about, that politicians are there to protect the voters from being ripped off. So, yes, I know you have state agencies put in place, consumer protection, all the rest of it, but it's a question of putting the correct laws in place, adjusting the laws if they don't actually work for changing circumstances, and then ensuring that they get enforced.
Maybe it's because, I'm going to be 65 next month, but a lot of people were a lot more upset about something else this week affecting ordinary people. This bike shed for 336,000 and I have never seen, I actually think it's these Albert Reynolds once had a saying, it's the little things trip you up. In terms of a government who is flat out to get re-elected, being as populist and as active on every front, this issue, I think, Harris came out on Tuesday and said it was inexplicable and inexcusable. The level of anger amongst working people and taxpayers because, you know, in parts of Clare and Longford, you can buy a 5-bedroom detached house for 336,000. They really don't get this. Apparently, it's only used by 3 or 4 people.
4.5 people per day on average. And some of the users, 18 bikes can be accommodated at capacity, but some of the users complain that it's built in such a way that the bikes still get wet.
Yeah,
so they don't leave their bikes
but isn't it true to say, when I look at the turquoise hire a bike, they're all out in the open. Like, surely bikes per se are weatherproof. I mean, like what is it about the precious bums of those in every sense?
Who likes
in
getting
Leinster?
their arse wet?
No, but the point is you can use a towel to dry it, for heaven's sake. I mean, no, but the point is this.
When were you last on a bike?
No, well, I have a problem with my back, but like I can ride a bike. But the point I'm trying to make is this, that this is symptomatic of something much, much, much more serious, is that the OPW and the powers that be and the public sector in general are now resting in Leinster, because Seán Furore is saying that the commission that runs Leinster House of Affairs, this was never brought to them and all the rest of it. This notion, especially in the context of the best public transport, will get you to Pearse Station, will get you to Stephen's Green in walking distance. Like, first of all, how this came about, but the fact that no head is going to roll, just treats taxpayers with contempt.
Okay, there's a number of things. I want to spend a bit of time on this, because I think there are a number of important issues in this. I mean, one thing that strikes me is, do they ever learn inside in Leinster House? Because what a lot of the coverage of the last week or so, last few days, seems to have forgotten is the tuck shop just inside the main gates on Kildare Street, which cost 1.3 million quid to build when it was opened in 2008. And closed 5 years later. It was making such losses because it wasn't accessible to the general public. So it was actually selling memorabilia to TDs and senators and maybe the guests that they had coming in particular cases. Daniel McConnell, the editor of the Business Post, was telling me on the radio on Wednesday that is now the most expensive shed in the country, that basically all it's used for is storing cameras for RT and Virgin Media when they do their work on the plinth, and then they can put their cameras in storage inside afterwards. So we paid €1.3 million for it. There also is Michael McDowell in the Irish Times during the week wrote about how they can't find out how much money is being spent on destroying the library inside Leinster House to turn it into a new committee room, and having taken out many of the lovely features, architectural features, to replace it with sort of modern tat. Now, as one listener to The Last Word pithily put it as well, Michael McDowell's complaining about that and wasting money. Isn't he the man who bought the land at Thornton Hall for a prison? So it's sort of touche in relation to that one. But it still is a relevant point.
And the car park was another issue.
Well, the car park, and they dug up Leinster Lawn, and then it turns out that when they reinstated the lawn, they are actually spending money for car parking all over the city, overflow car parking, because there isn't enough car parking, not just for the TDs and senators, but for former TDs and former ministers. You have rights, don't you? Have lifetime rights to car parking in Leinster House.
In fairness, I do use public transport, and I never ever use it. But anyway,
if you were to rock up, do you need a pass in the car, or could you just rock up and say to security, hello, I'm Ivan Yates, I'm a former minister and TD, I have lifetime rights to park here?
Well, it may surprise you, most people recognise me, so that isn't a problem. All the ushers were no longer there for my time. But the point about it is that sometimes I take a shortcut from Marion Thing to go to maybe somewhere like Davies in Buswells or something like that, and they just nod me through. But no, the situation is former TDs did have rights, but I think it has tightened up. But if we could just pivot into some of the gossip.
No, sorry, I'm not finished on this. And there's a couple of strands I still want to invest in this. Who is going to suffer the consequences of this politically? Because I wonder, will the government get the blame for what will be perceived as a failure of oversight on the Office of Public Works? Will the Greens get the blame, particularly on the basis, you want to be shoving in bicycle stands and bicycle racks and stuff like this, and look at the cost of it? I mean, is there going to be a political fallout as a relation to this? Well,
put it like this. My understanding is, as we speak, there's disquiet in the boss's office, and there's going to be a head required for this, because they must put this issue to bed.
you see heads required, and this is the other thing. I think this is the broader thing that
I'm not talking about a political head, by the way.
Oh, I know. Look, I know. For once, they can actually say it's an official head.
Yeah.
But you know what? Can you actually fire an official?
No, but
you can't.
They send to Cavan or something like that.
That brings us to actually maybe the heart of the issue. The real heart of the issue is that this is systemic overspending on things that we need, but that should be done for a far, far cheaper price.
But we need an FOI. Who got this money?
Yeah. No, let's just broaden it out outside the environs of Leinster House. And let's talk about the National Children's Hospital is the biggest example of a budget being set and then oversight and just goes absolutely crazy. And that's probably the biggest, most obvious example because it's costing 4 and 5 times the initial price we were told a new National Children's Hospital would pay. How many things over the years? I mean, we get told that the Port Tunnel got brought in on budget. It actually didn't get brought in on the initial budget. The budget gets changed and changed. And then when it's finally completed, hey, it's brought in on budget. The same with the Lewis. People say that the roads have been brought in largely on budget. Sometimes they have, sometimes they haven't. And I see, this is why I think it's significant. We will get in a moment to Sinn Féin's housing policy, because I wonder the big thing which people will think about. Sinn Féin is putting an enormous amount of store in that the state will provide in a way that the private sector cannot provide. The state, and you just look at things like the bike shed and you look at things like the Children's Hospital and you wonder, how can Owen O'Brien be so confident that if he devolves responsibility back to the local authorities and if he gives further powers to state agencies, that they'll actually use them properly when all of the evidence that we have is that the state fails?
Yeah, we're going to take a deep dive into what is going to be the policy background for the election, which is housing. But you mentioned Michael McDowell a couple of times there. So I'm starting my in-depth research. So I rang Samantha Long, who's his secretary and also does the administration of the Senate group. An avid listener to the podcast, could not have been a nicer person. I said, what's the story about Michael standing in Dublin Bay South? So, but he's gone off for August. And he's going to come back and make a decision.
We're in September now.
No. So then I checked with a Fine Gael source. I said, what's the story of Michael McDowell? Well, he leafleted the whole constituency last week.
He did.
So he's definitely standing. And the other news
Sorry, can I tell you, I didn't actually, the leaflet didn't come in my door, but I was told about it by a taxi driver who lives near to where I am. And because he told me that what Michael McDowell is very focusing on, bread and butter issues like bus gates going in through Dublin 6 into the city centre. So he's standing. He's standing. And I would say he will get elected. And pity poor James Geoghegan, because not only will he have ex-Fine Gaeler on his doorstep, but also Kate O'Connell is going to be added, I would say, within the next week. Well, that's interesting, because
she's definitely going to be added.
What I was just going to say to you about that is
they're looking for 2 seats.
Well, they're not going to get 2 seats if Michael McDowell runs.
That's the point.
So why would Kate O'Connell sacrifice herself potentially? Why wouldn't she go and run a different constituency?
Well, she has 2 chances. One of getting ahead of Geoghegan. And the other thing is they think that maybe Jim O'Callaghan, because of the links between McDowell and Bertie and being his Attorney General and Minister for Justice, that he'll actually take a Fianna Fáil vote. But
he'd take the Law Library vote as well. Although there's also Ivana Bacik in that constituency
and Hazel Chu. So all of that is completely upended, which means how, when we're at the Olympia in Cork, this is a moving story. Take the other example of Meath West. The convention on the 9th of September for Fine Gael, I understand Damien is number 17.
Damien English is going to go?
Is not going to stand.
And Shane Castles isn't going to run for Fianna Fáil.
That's right. That's right. And the person who's going to be the biggest beneficiary of that is Noel Dempsey's daughter, Aisling, who's in Trim. But Shane not standing clears the way for that, because 2-1 really didn't go there. Shane didn't do great in the last election as an outgoing TD. But it's absolutely fascinating what I subsequently heard. Okay, so what's plan B if Damien doesn't stand? So Noel French did quite well the last time. He'd be number 1. But who did I hear was being sussed out to see if she'd run? Is Mairead McGuinness. And then there's the issue, could she run in Louth? I
thought Louth was been earmarked for it, that they saw that they need somebody to go into Louth, Fine Gael, and they also see that perhaps Sinn Féin isn't going to be as strong in Louth as they thought.
Yeah, absolutely, with Imelda Munster out. But there's so many intriguing plays going on.
Will Mairead McGuinness have to resign as European
She's
Commissioner?
already gone.
Is she gone?
Well, in November she's gone.
Yeah, she's not gone. She's still in situ until the new commission.
I accept that.
There's a lot of horse trading going on. So will she have to resign 4 weeks early?
I'm not saying that she's going to stand. What I'm saying is she's been sussed out to stand.
Just the point there would be, would that interfere with her financial exit package? Remember, when the commissioners step down, don't they get a big payment when they've served out their term? Would she lose money by resigning as European Commissioner in advance?
We'll put it like this. What she wants is not to stand for the Dáil, but to stand for the presidency. But so therefore she can't tell FGHQ to F off. She has to play the game, dance the dance, but she's not going to stand for the Dáil, in my opinion.
Okay, would she have a better chance of the presidency if she was TD, or would she have a better chance running as former European Commissioner? And actually, would she really be the first Fine Gael person to be elected as president?
Well, no. In my view, if Micheál Martin runs, he wins.
He's not going to run, Ivan.
Yeah, that's not what I'm hearing.
But anyway, who's wishful thinking you're hearing that from?
No, well, from some of his own people, insofar as that the appointment to Jack Chambers shows for the first time he's looking beyond his current role.
He's looking to 5 years' time.
He's certainly looking to be Taoiseach again, no question about that. But and therefore November 2025 timing is not good from that point of view. But just say, and I'm not saying this loud, that it became the situation that Fianna Fáil, on a rotating Taoiseach, if the government was re-elected, got the second term, he could put Jack Chambers in as Taoiseach and he could exit then. Do you understand me? But either way, all that is speculation. But really what I'm trying to say is, when you look at Dublin Bay South and you look at Meath West and you look at, Joe Carey announced since we last spoke that he's leaving in Clare. I have now reached my number 17 figure that I've been predicting all along if Damien doesn't stand. But anyway, let's talk about Sinn Féin and the housing policy.
No, I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll take a break and then we'll come back and we'll talk about Sinn Féin and its housing policy. Welcome back to Path to Power. So, we're going to move now to the big political announcement of the week, Sinn Féin's housing policy for the general election. This is Sinn Féin's big effort to re-establish it, to regain momentum that it has lost over the last year. And will it work, Ivan? You've had a deep dive into the Sinn Féin housing policy. I've had a read through it as well. What's your initial assessment of how appealing it might be to the electorate and whether or not it would actually work?
Okay. So, first of all, hats off to Owen O'Brien. The amount of work and policy research gone into this is quite extraordinary. Secondly, there are a couple of things that I think are worthy of mention. We have a particular problem with the economics of flat, really dense development in inner city areas whereby the economic price and the cost price are different. So the government have a Cree Conaha scheme which can give a unit cost subsidy of 25 grand up to 144 grand. Their particular proposal for a compact design scheme, I think, is a good idea. And secondly, their idea to give finance to small builders who, after the crash, don't have much equity to leverage borrowings and so on, I think is a good idea to get the maximum level of house building. But there are real terms and conditions on this. First of all, I think for social housing, this will be a better deal than the government is doing. However, catch number one. So they say they're going to do an affordable house scheme whereby you will be able to get a house, we'll say, for 300 grand. The way they're doing that is that they will give you a state site and they will service it for free. But it is only partial home ownership of an affordable house. And so therefore the resale value of that, it's like the old days of ground rent. And so therefore I think people will say, well, that isn't home ownership. It's partial ownership. It's a home you won't own. The second issue is... Sorry,
can we just discuss that issue first a little bit, right? Because I actually don't have a problem with that. I think that's actually a really interesting idea. Because it means that a home is something to live in. And if you're getting it at that price, at a good price, that's an affordable price, it shouldn't be a speculative asset that you hope you'll be able to sell at a bigger price in the future. That's the first point.
But who owns it?
You own the house, right?
Okay.
I mean, let me give you an example, right? Because Simon Harris, and I'm going to read the quote he said this week, and he was sort of sneering at what they were doing. He says, "Remember when I tried to do that in relation to a hospital? And that's the new maternity hospital in the St. Vincent site, owned by an order of nuns." He said, Sinn Féin were very much against that. They saw it was very important that if you own the building, you own the land. That was Mary Lou McDonald's comment in relation to that, but she doesn't think that applies to this situation. Okay, but hold on a second. I remember us being told by the government in relation to the National Maternity Hospital that it didn't matter who owned the land. What mattered was what sat on the land, and that there was a 300-year lease that would be owned for that. So it was irrelevant. It's what's on the land which actually matters. So if that was the government's position in relation to that, how can it condemn the Sinn Féin position in relation to state land being used for public housing, for affordable housing?
And sorry, the policy behind this is that there would be a two-tier housing market. Affordable houses, which could only be bought by an eligible category of people, and then your house where you own the site. I remember when I was a TD in the early 80s, I couldn't believe it. I kept getting letters from people about the Portsmouth estate, that the ground rent was unpaid, and they wanted to be able to buy out the ground rent. I actually think from a bank point of view, from a mortgage point of view, from a security of homeowner, I want to do this with my home. I've paid my mortgage. That this is a short-term fix. There's a second issue.
Sorry, just before we get to saying, but on that as well, I suppose I'm just sure the banks will have particularly an issue as long as they have title over the property. I think they'll probably be all right with it, that they'll understand what's going on. But that hasn't been clarified as yet. And I know Darragh O'Brien, the Fianna Fáil Housing Minister, has written to the Banking Payments Federation and Brian Hayes there seeking clarification as to what the banks will do. And if the banks were to turn around and say, no, that's not good enough, that blows up Sinn Féin's proposals very quickly. So that's a big thing to have pushed on the Banking Payments Federation, which represents the main Irish banks.
The other issue, which I think is very clear-cut, if you take middle-income earners who have a combined household income of over 90 grand, which if you have it with a dual working couple isn't that high, right? They get nothing. They lose the Help to Buy. They lose access to the First Home Scheme. And so therefore what I think is that this actually is targeted not to the generality of people who want to be first-time home buyers. It's targeted to a lower income cohort. And
that's where then this really runs into big issues, I think, for Sinn Féin, because if you have that cohort who are, what you might call, just for the sake of argument, the middle classes, who now feel that home ownership potential is removed from them, that without the shared equity scheme or without various other financial supports, Help to Buy, that they are getting priced out of the market, that they have to have a lower income or else have to really be dependent on the state to provide. I think there could be something of a kickback against that. And there are other issues in relation to that as well, because if that finance is removed, are the builders actually going to build houses that they may think are actually harder to actually shift? And the other point that comes very strongly out of the Sinn Féin document, is 30% social housing as against 70% private. But if they're trying to clamp down further on the institutions owning and renting apartments, then those apartments are not going to be built. So the target to get to the 500,000 houses in the lifetime of the government, which Sinn Féin is proposing, becomes harder and harder and harder to reach. You could actually see a fall in output.
Absolutely. But also the other big axis is the abolition of the LDA, the Land Development Agency. So as of now, there are 14,000 houses that are under construction. And you would have massive development like Clonburris, 8,000 houses actually in Owen O'Brien's constituency. You would have Shanganna's near completion, but you'd have future schemes like Colbert in Limerick and so on. If you abolish the LDA, it will take 2 years to replace it with something else. And that level of upheaval is a serious problem. And then you alluded to the other issue.
Surely the trick there is to give the LDA greater powers to actually increase its ambition. My criticism of the LDA has been that it has not been ambitious enough. I mean, that was one of the reasons why John Moran, now the Mayor of Limerick, quit as the chair of the LDA. He wanted a scheme in Colbert which was a multiple of the size. And, I was down at Colbert this week, down in Limerick, and just briefly in the area looking
It's beside
around.
the stations,
Yeah,
if you
beside
know
the train station. That's right, because I got off the train and I was heading off from there. But just looking around in the area, and you can just see it is crying out for redevelopment. I mean, we talk, and we will talk when we get to the Olympia about Dublin city centre and how it needs to be regenerated. But the same applies in other cities around the country. We'll be talking about that in Cork as well, at the Cork Opera House. But Limerick just struck me, is crying out for regeneration, and the land is there, but the ambition hasn't been there, which comes back to the point as well earlier. I mean, we were talking about the bicycle rack in Leinster House, and you go, Jesus, when they do something, they make a hames of it and they overspend. But it does worry me that, the Sinn Féin document is putting in an awful lot of store in the state to do things. But we have two major problems to date, and I don't know how Eoin Ó Broin thinks he's going to actually solve this. It's a lack of ambition among state authorities to do things, and then a lack of responsibility for actually how they spend their money. Maybe they don't want to, a lot of the times the lack of ambition is because they're afraid of being blamed if things go wrong. But funny enough, if things go wrong, people might get blamed, but they certainly don't seem to lose their jobs like they do in the private sector.
So the other 2 points I want to make about it is that at first sight, Sinn Féin are committed to spending $4 billion a year more of taxpayers' money on housing. That must give more output and get, from 40 to 60,000 houses. But if you actually look at 60,000 houses a year, the cost of that, 400 grand a pop, right? It's 24 billion. If the state is putting in the revised figure of 8 billion, where are you going to get the other 16? The fact of the matter is that the private sector, when they see the words 3-year rent freeze, they will run from the Irish market. So I think that end of it is not joined up. But you do make a point in relation to there's a huge emphasis on local authorities. The truth of it is, if there was a league table of local authorities, and even on the primetime programme it showed that the biggest decline in the last 12 months has been local authority performance. If it was not for what's called the AHBs, the Cluids, the Responds, the Focuses, they have built half of the social houses. So relying on local authorities is not a silver bullet when AHBs are actually delivering.
And what did you make of Pierce Doherty going all Charlie McCreevy, that when we have it, we'll spend it? Because basically he has decided that they're not going to be putting money in government into the funds planning
the
infrastructure
or the
funds,
climate fund.
Climate fund, saying that
that's Metro gone.
We need money now to build houses.
Well, I think that's a reasonable political point. I think he gets support of that. But if you look at the Exchequer returns for August, there's an overspend on budget day of 2.7 billion already this year. They're all at it. We're in the middle of a Dutch auction, Matt. It's a disgrace.
Okay, but if he doesn't invest in infrastructure, I would have thought that one of the most important things for the future of the country, now you can say rather than putting money aside into saving funds for the long-term future, but surely the money has to go into things like, as we've spoken about on this programme or in this podcast previously, water infrastructure,
sanitary services,
electricity provision. You can't build houses without those things.
You know what they're going to do? They're going to announce either with or before the budget, the proceeds of all the bank sales are going to go into that.
Well, Simon Harris has already indicated
special
that.
Extra money is going to be provided for that, and they're going to say we're going to replace one asset with another asset. And actually, I'm all in favour of that because, if the sanitary services aren't built, nothing is going to happen. And I'm not just talking about the River Shannon or Clonjock here. I am talking about some basic schemes from Arklow to Clonmel.
This Sinn Féin proposal, Eoin Ó Broin, it's a 112-page document, I think.
132, actually.
132, sorry. There's going to be a slimmed-down version put into every letterbox in the country, which I thought was very interesting because it shows old-fashioned direct mail is still the way to go, perhaps rather than depending on social media, which is one thing. You wonder how much attention people will pay to it when they do get it in the letterbox. And then the question is, how much of it will they believe? How much will they believe the Sinn Féin, and it comes back to what I said to you earlier, will people think it's a good idea? And then if they do believe it's a good idea, Will Sinn Féin be able to implement it? What's your take on how this is going to restore Sinn Féin's political fortunes?
I actually think that just talking about housing is very good politics. So people don't get mired in the detail that we've got into just there. So I think that's good politics. I think also, once you can wave a document, here's the solution, at the level that people engage, that is progress. I think when people delve into it, they will see that if you're on the list of homeless, you're probably better off under Sinn Féin. But if you're anywhere looking to own your own home, and even an affordable home, you're better with the devil you know. But let's be clear, the growth in population is so quick that actually we're chasing our tail.
Well, see, this is what I was just about to bring up with you. I mean, Davy did a projection last week based on the latest CSO figures about not just the ones we've spoken about previously, projecting over 7 million people living in the Republic alone by 2057, but showing that, we've increased our population by, 500,000 people, extra workers in the last decade. Davy says 85,000 homes a year need to be built. Now, we did do that once. We did it at the height of the Celtic Tiger, and we were importing people from all over the world to build the houses, for them to live in and all the rest of it. But all of these projections from the government, from Sinn Féin, they're talking about getting up to 50,000, 60,000, whatever, which clearly means that there's continued shortcomings and would imply, according to the laws of supply and demand and dynamic pricing, that rents will continue to go up unless, of course, they're frozen, and that prices for existing properties and for new properties will continue to rise as well. But then, how much can they rise as against incomes?
Red alert. 27th of August. South Dublin County Council refuses permission for new Google data centre amid electricity pinch. The 28 billion, like we speak about 20 years ago, it's 4 billion in CPT. It's now gone up. This is before Trump gets in. Yeah, before Trump gets in.
Oh, you think Trump's going to get in?
I'm not dissuaded that he's not going to get in. And it's deadly for Ireland, because if he reduces the corporation profit tax, the companies will reshore at 15%. But that's not a done deal, and we'll deal with that again. But the point I'm making is, simultaneously with this decision was a decision by Laois County Council to refuse a wind farm in cooled glass. And Sean Fleming said to the developers, because they're going to the High Court to get a judicial review, to pack their bags. The fact is, there is no joined up thinking. And the fact is we have NIMBYism everywhere. That it's our bananas all around the place. Build absolutely nothing anywhere. And you sent me a thing about Simon Harris did about 10 interviews, or one particular one with Pat Lee at the Irish Times. I heard him as I was driving in here this morning about something, and he said, this was the cap on Dublin Airport, that we cannot interfere in the planning process. What? If the politicians don't interfere in the planning process, this country will grind to a halt. What? Taoiseach, do you think 800 pages of a planning bill is interfering with the planning process to try and cap fees for these windfall lawyers and so on? Unless there is a gross political intervention, both your electricity and your water is facing peril. And if you can't get that into your head, there is no hope for any of us.
Well, actually, Eamon Ryan was in on the radio on the last...
I actually heard it, yes. I was driving to Portlaoise yesterday.
And he was a good man. I'm glad to hear you listening to me.
He gave him a soft ride.
Do you think so?
Yeah. I heard the Danny interview as well. But anyway, the point, I was wanting to see which part of it you're going to fill it. But
he was actually sort of giving out to me about a piece I wrote in the Business Post recently, saying that government action is needed in relation
to which you say you don't speak to Michael O'Leary. I heard that.
I don't.
You had all your alibis in place.
Michael O'Leary has not spoken to me in 6 years.
You tell your interviewee what they want to hear. The fact is, the minister has refused to get his finger out, and that extends to the Taoiseach. That is unless central government has central authority over planning issues, this idea that there can't be political intervention is such a false presumption. Wake up.
It's the law, he said to me. He said it's legal.
And who writes the law?
Well, that's what I said to him, Ivan.
That's right.
That's what I did say to him.
So, so basically, we have moved now to the battleground of housing, and I think it's fascinating.
But talking about spending, somebody else that I had on that same edition of The Last Word was Seamus Coffey from the Irish Fiscal Advisory Council. So he's back in business.
He's bleating in the wilderness again.
Well,
he's right. He's right.
That's what I put to him. Like, why come back to be ignored again? I mean, because he had a period away from IFAC, he's back in. They consistently get ignored in relation to their warnings about what could be risky spending. But, then we talk about spending, and something else that I suppose this morning really came up, and I actually think about it, was quite surprised. Taoiseach Simon Harris goes to Ukraine. And a select number of journalists are brought with him. And there's a big row with the political journalists about that.
You see, you're inside the bubble. Tell me about it. I'm interested in that.
Well, it's actually, I know, because John Lee wrote about it in the Irish Daily Mail.
He wasn't on the trip,
He wasn't on the trip. And Chris Donoghue,
I used
to
do that when I was minister. Yeah. I'd be going on these trips to sell beef and sheep meat and dairy products to Italy. And we go into every show. I'd always pick out the ag correspondents who I knew were most pivotal to my publicity and wine them and dine them and do all that.
Well, this is it, you see. So Chris Donoghue had a certain number of seats available on the flight to Ukraine, apparently. So he brought selected journalists and he left certain newspapers off the list. And when John Lee queried...
Get a bigger plane.
When John Lee queried this, he was told that it was the broadcasters and the broadsheets. The broadsheets brought Irish Times and Irish Independent, to which John Lee pointed out the Irish Independent is not a broadsheet. It's a compact exactly the same, or a tabloid the same as the Irish Daily Mail. So that row, I think what Chris Donoghue might find is that there might be now some publications will not be well disposed towards them. But anyway, my point on it was like Simon Harris goes to Ukraine, and Ukraine is actually a major issue for Ireland because if you think of it, despite the fact that many of our politicians get more exercised about what Israel is doing in Gaza, and I can understand that because what Israel is doing in Gaza is absolutely terrible. But what Russia is doing in Ukraine is equally as terrible. It doesn't get actually as much attention from many of our politicians, even though there are innocent civilians been slaughtered by the Russians there as well. And we have the financial consequences of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This has cost us an awful lot of money, and it has also cost us social unrest because of the fact that all of the refugees that we have accommodated throughout the country, and a small minority complaining about that. But anyway, Simon Harris, he's there in Ukraine, and what does he get asked about? He gets asked about redress for those who have suffered at the hands of molesters in the secondary schools, which is a very important subject. But I would have thought, lads, we'll deal with that when we're back in Ireland, deal with Ukraine when we're here.
Just on that, only this morning I got a text from my source who's dealing with the Ukrainian migrants, and we had this before, BOTBs, beneficiaries of temporary provisions. Next week, the social welfare provisions about their accommodation is changing, and there is murder in Bursacane and other areas. We'll talk about this again, but actually the Ukrainians are being shifted out.
Okay.
A really interesting story.
I wonder, did Zelensky know that when Simon Harris visited him in Kyiv this week? Well, but sorry, on the redress thing, that's another thing, when you talk about spending money, Simon Harris is not going to wait for a commission of inquiry to make findings. He seems to want to start giving redress immediately. And there are some suggestions this could cost €5 billion. €5 billion.
Yeah.
Now, I'm very sympathetic to the victims of this, and as it happens...
But the religious order should pay, not the taxpayer.
But see, that's when it's about to come. And if they say that they don't have the financial resources...
Take their property.
Absolutely.
CAB.
Compulsory purchase. The time has come, and they have prime land in so many positions around the country, in towns and villages and cities, some of the best land, and which has not been used necessarily for schools and things like that at the moment. Take their land, compulsory acquisition at bargain basement prices, because the history of this state shows that when you try and negotiate deals for them to pay redress, and this happened with the institutions previously, they are slow and tardy to do so, or they only give over a small proportion, and most of the time they're just continuing to keep the income flows or the capital benefit for themselves rather than paying redress. So let's not let it fall on the state. Let's get them to pay for it.
An associate of Harris has told me that he never got the credit that he did in double quick time, 22 million of redress for the Stardust people. It had been left lingering for a long time. So I think he feels he has a handle on redress, and maybe that's going to go to his head. But can I tell you about where I was last night? which was I was guest speaker, after dinner speaker, for the association, I didn't know they exist, of Garda, not superintendents, but chief superintendents. So there are about...
The elite superintendents.
Oh, absolutely. These people will all go on to be assistant commissioners and commissioners. And so therefore, I was in Portlaoise last night.
What were you talking to them about?
Well, I told them how the country should be run, how the country is being run. I told them what's going to happen in the election. But I also said to them that there are a couple of policing issues. I'm not an expert on policing or security. And the commissioner and others were there. Was that, first of all, they have a huge problem. So when there's 2 deputy commissioners under Drew Harris. So one of them retired. And what do they get? A 6-figure tax bill. Because in 2014, there was this tax brought in that if you have a pension pot, which is really in the public sector, of over 2 million, you've got to pay 40% of the capital value of that almost up front. So now there was no applicant for the vacancy of one of the 2 deputy commissioners. The government got this is going to happen to every Secretary General position. Someone moves from one department to the top talent in this, and it's going to have to be changed because no one will apply for these senior posts. I shudder to think what Robert Watt will have to pay, but the bottom line is...
Are people retiring prematurely so that they don't reach the 2 million limit?
No, the situation, they're not even applying for jobs.
I understand that.
Okay, but like the situation is, it's only now that this is maturing. It was introduced in 2014.
So when they retire, I mean, I remember somebody saying to me recently that a 2 million pension pot would give you an annual income of something like 60,000 a year, which would be taxed as well if you're getting that much in a pension.
Taxed on the way out.
Yes, fair. Even as on your annual income tax, it would be taxed, right? But you're saying that on that you actually have to pay an exit charge.
So
do people have to save up in their last few years of work to actually to have that money ready to pay?
Sorry, the revenue is sending out the bills now, but nobody knew these existed, even though the legislation put in place. So solution, right? Government make a decision to reduce the tax to 10%, raise the threshold beyond 2 million, whatever they want to do. But they have an independent expert report on this. They haven't republished the report and they haven't made a decision on it. And I think it's absolutely imperative. The other thing that came across to me is the policing of the far right, Coolock, November riots and so on. There needs to be revised management for the deployment of the public order unit. As you know, in Coolock, they actually left the site. The workers were really imperiled there. And the other thing that came across to me was, listening to them, an issue of psychological safety. So if you are a cop and you're in the middle of a riot situation, can you get out your taser or can you get out your kit to defend yourself?
Pepper spray or whatever.
Exactly. So people are looking over their back to know, because the first rule, it's written up in the department walls, but you don't see it, CYA, cover your own ass. And the cops feel on the front line they don't have the political and administrative and managerial backing. And this has led to...
These guys you were with, though, and I presume it was nearly all men, was it?
But put it like this, one of the deputy commissioners was female, the assistant second, the department was female, but 99% were,
men. Those people probably are not out on the front line dealing with riots.
Oh, no, these are the senior, like this is of 14,000. You're talking about the top 40.
They are responsible for those, and I think some of the images that still I recall from the November riots in Dublin were of individual Gardaí getting isolated by a mob, which should never have actually happened.
It's bad management. But so the situation is that if you look what happened in the UK, on one night there were 8 different sites of rioting. So the likelihood is, Matt, this is going to get worse. And I think we need from the top down a management political series of decisions that will give psychological safety to cops on the line, that would ensure that the public order unit can actually ensure that these riots are dealt with, because they are going to increase and they're going to become more violent.
You must have watched far too much American television growing up, because you're the only person I've ever come across who calls the Gardaí cops.
Well, I call them all sorts of things, the boys in blue or whatever you like to call them. But like the point is that there are issues pertaining. The new commissioner is going to be appointed after March.
Yeah, because Drew Harris is not staying on, is he?
That's right. I don't think he was asked to stay on. But
you know what we must do?
He's done 6 years.
Yeah, but we'll have to do when it comes to the time, because now that we're adding in the new subscription model and the rest of it, we should do a deep dive on Drew Harris's tenure as Garda Commissioner when the time comes.
I look forward to that. Last weekend, I was down in Bantry.
I know you were.
A 3-day wedding.
I know you were, because
my nephew.
I also had a friend of mine sent on a photograph of having a pint with you down in a pub in West Cork.
Me have a pint? Unheard of. No, the situation was I was in this pub in Bandon, and who walks in doing a Saturday afternoon clinic when I was trying to watch the end of the Arsenal match and the thing before day 2 of the wedding? Only Michael Collins. And
Micheál Collins, isn't it?
Well, he's a terribly nice fella, actually. Yeah. So anyway, he told all the people for his clinic to wait. He had to talk to me. He said that Ken O'Flynn would get elected in Cork North Central. He said he got 3,000 votes. We'll be discussing that in the Opera House. And also, I note that Eddie Punch is going to stand in Clare and has a right chance of a seat after his good...
You said he had a right chance of a seat in the European election.
Well, he got... I said he'd make a respectable showing. He got 20,000 votes and had Michael McNamara on his tail in his base area of Clare. But I'm not saying he's certainly get... What I'm trying to say is this: the most important thing that Michael prevailed on me, not that he wouldn't get 12,000 votes again because we'd be previewing Cork Southwest, but Independent Ireland are very much in the business that if FFFG are 14 short, they're in business of going into government, and they're very interested in replacing the Greens.
Okay, we'll leave it there maybe perhaps. Micheál Collins and the Cork constituencies is something that we will be discussing on Friday night, the 13th of September in the Opera House as part of the Cork Podcast Festival. And
I will, because a lot of people text me, I'll be in the bar afterwards. If anyone wants to buy me a drink, I'll be available for selfies and the usual arrangements.
You don't be going charging an extra fee. Dynamic pricing for a photograph of Ivan Yates with a pint in hand with him. And then, of course, as your last chance to get tickets as well for the Olympia Theatre, Path to Power podcast live in the Olympia on Wednesday, September 11th. And we'll be talking about all the Irish issues and Dublin issues, but also about the Trump-Harris debate, which will have taken place overnight.
And some special guests in both places.
Absolutely.
They won't listen to you droning on the whole time. We'll actually have some interesting people as well.
Thank you very much for being with us on the latest edition of Path to Power. From me, Matt Cooper.
And from me, Ivan Yates.
Until the next time.